Good morning to you. It's 7 o'clock. You're watching the only breakfast show live from Westminster. Today, President Biden marks his first 100 days in office, telling Congress that America is on the move again, outlining big spending plans overnight. Here, this morning's front pages are again dominated by the ongoing row about the PM's refurbishment of his flat. Boris Johnson says people are more interested in the pandemic. We'll talk about that with the Vaccines Minister Nadhim Zahawi shortly. Also today...
Good morning, Pez. Are you ready for a training session today?
He's a game old bird. We'll meet the ex-soldier who's been joined by a fun-running pheasant on his daily training routine. And also for you today, Stranger Things, the artist who spent lockdown completing portraits of people she's never actually met. It's Thursday, the 29th of April.
The President of the United States.
Turning peril into possibility, President Biden marks 100 days in office, outlining his vision for life in the United States after the pandemic.
After just 100 days, I can report to the nation, America is on the move again.
Another record rise in coronavirus cases and deaths in India as the United States donates $100 million worth of supplies. No let-up in the so-called cash for curtains row, with the PM still under pressure to explain how the revamp of his Downing Street flat was paid for. The UN criticises Britain's decision to cut funding for a scheme to prevent thousands of child deaths in the world's poorest countries. Feeling the heat of climate change, a warning the world's glaciers are melting twice as fast as 20 years ago. And, hey big spender, the Royal Mint unveils the largest coin it's ever made.
The bank holiday weekend will close on a wet and windy note, but for the time being it stays chilly with sunshine and showers. I'll have more details on those before 12:30.
Well, a very good morning to you. President Biden has marked his first 100 days in the White House, telling Congress that America is on the move again and that despite the pain of the last year, the country will turn peril into possibility. Joe Biden outlined a series of ambitious spending plans running into trillions of dollars aimed at boosting family life, the minimum wage and jobs. He also warned he's prepared to stand up against military and commercial threats from China. Alex Rossi reports from Washington.
Madam Speaker, the President of the United States.
A familiar setting, but this would be an address to Congress like no other. With Joe Biden's presidency silhouetted against the backdrop of a pandemic, this was a socially distanced event. There were a few masked fist bumps, but only a small audience was present, most members watching on TV. But history was also made for another reason.
Well, Madam Speaker, Madam Vice President, no president has ever said those words from this podium. No president has ever said those words, and it's about time.
The spectre of coronavirus was, though, always present. The president highlighting the success of the vaccination program.
Everyone, look, over the age of 16, everyone is now eligible to get vaccinated right now, right away. Go get vaccinated, America.
And it wasn't lost on anyone either that this very chamber was stormed by pro-Trump supporters just a few months ago.
The insurrection was an existential crisis, a test of whether our democracy could survive, and it did. But the struggle is far from over.
His big pitch, though, multi-trillion-dollar big government rescue plans for jobs, families and COVID recovery. And in the bear pit of the US's polarized politics, the president didn't completely turn his back on harnessing the power of populism.
American tax dollars are going to be used to buy American products made in America to create American jobs. That's the way it's supposed to be, and it will be in this administration.
Uniting the country and fixing racial inequalities will be difficult. After the murder of George Floyd, reforming the police will also be a priority.
We've all seen the knee of injustice on the neck of Black Americans. Now's our opportunity to make some real progress, to rebuild trust between law enforcement and the people they serve, to root out systemic racism in our criminal justice system, and to enact police reform in George Floyd's name.
How to lay the foundations for an American century will not come easily. Resistance from the Republicans will make some of his agenda impossible. But for now, at least, it's clear that this president, who's waited a long time for this moment, is dreaming big.
Well, Alex is live in Washington for us this morning. Look, how has this gone down? I mean, both in Congress, Alex, but also, crucially, especially at the moment, amongst the American public.
Well, it's very difficult to ascertain at the moment. Certainly, this speech was Joe Biden setting out his stall, not just, of course, to the people here in the Beltway in Washington, D.C., but he's speaking directly, Stephen, to the American people as well. You heard about the amount of money that he wants to spend, nearly $4 trillion, trying to revamp the American economy with infrastructure, jobs, money for families, dealing with the coronavirus pandemic. I mean, it's the kind of largesse, federal largesse, this country really hasn't seen in modern times. You probably need to reach back till, I don't know, the Second World War, really, to get that kind of spending power. And he wants to sell that to the American people. Now, certainly amongst those Americans who are receiving paychecks already in their bank accounts to help out in the COVID crisis, there is some support, bipartisan support. But amongst Republicans, to them, this smells like big government. This smells like interference, and they don't want anything to do with it. He's obviously calling for unity, but he's unlikely to unite the United States on this particular issue. But Joe Biden was also trying to do something else. He was setting himself up as a transitional president. There were two things in this speech. One was mentioned over and over again. That was coronavirus. There was another thing that was very present there that wasn't mentioned at all, and that was Donald Trump. But Trump was present all the time in this speech. Joe Biden is setting himself up as the man who can move the country beyond the years of his predecessor.
OK, Alex, thank you. Now, there's lots to talk about in terms of Britain's response to the pandemic this morning. So, delighted to say we're joined by the Vaccines Minister, Nadhim Zahawi. Really good to see you in the flesh.
Finally.
It makes a lovely change. Look, is the government still being driven by data and not dates in our response?
Very much so. And if you recall, when the Prime Minister set out the roadmap to reopening the economy, he talked about the 4 tests. One is vaccines need to continue to be deployed at scale. Vaccine efficacy, we're seeing some really good data in terms of vaccine protection, and now from Public Health England, the vaccines working against household transmission, cutting it by 50%. 3, obviously, infection rates, because the virus will attempt to infect more people to mutate. And then the 4th is the mutations. So the 4 weeks plus 1, the 5-week period, is really important because there's 4 weeks of data gathering as we open up. We had a big opening this month on the 12th of April of the economy. The data's looking good and positive, but nevertheless, we really have to be careful, because what we don't want is mutations, for example, to blindside us and then have another spike.
And yet Jonathan Van Tam said, didn't he, you know, if people were fully vaccinated, it would be incredibly safe, in his words, for them to meet up and to have some physical contact, all that sort of thing. With that in mind, can't we ease things a little bit more for those people who are fully vaccinated?
So this is why we have to be careful. I think the full quote was, yes, of course, they are incredibly safe if they are fully vaccinated, so 2 doses. At the moment, only 1 in 4 adults have actually had the 2 doses. Now, we're accelerating second doses. April has been second dose month. But let me give it to you, let me sort of give you the flip side of why we have to be careful on this. If the vaccines have 85% efficacy and we vaccinate fully 85% of the adult population, that still is only 72% protection. So there's still quite a sizable percentage for the virus to go after and infect, which is why we've got to be careful. Hence why the 4 weeks of data collection and then 1 week of analysis and then moving to the next step. Now, the good news is we're not seeing any evidence that would lead us to believe that we can't meet the next step in May, the really important step, 17th of May, and then ultimately, obviously, the 21st of June. But it's much better to be careful and follow the data, collect the data properly, analyse it, and then make a decision, than to... We all want to obviously get our freedoms back as quickly as possible, but let's do this properly, let's do it safely.
Well, in terms of that, there's obviously now the talk about a booster, and 60 million Pfizer vaccines have been bought or are being bought. Where does that leave us in terms of sort of cross-vaccination? Is that going to be Pfizer vaccines given to people as a booster, whatever else they've taken in the past?
So for this current deployment, so phase 1, we've just completed the over 50s. Everybody's been offered a first dose. Of course, we're now second dosing, as I explained. That deployment continues. So if you've had Pfizer, you'll get a Pfizer second dose. If you've had AstraZeneca, you get AstraZeneca second dose, and Moderna. We have 2 clinical trials that are important. One is the mix and match trial, which we've put £7 million to fund. That will report at the end of the summer. That will help us for future-proofing and planning of vaccination campaigns. The second one, which Jonathan Van Tam referred to last night, which is the Cove Boost trial, which looks at which booster vaccine single shot would be the best. Now, what we want to do, and my focus at the moment, is to give the scientists as many options as possible for that future-proofing, whether it's Pfizer, AstraZeneca variant, Valneva, the Scottish manufactured vaccine, and, of course, Novavax, which works extremely well against both the current dominant virus, which is the Kent virus, and the South African virus.
I mean, I spoke to Sir John Bell, who's on the vaccine task force, a couple of weeks ago, and he was very much of the opinion, looking at the data he'd seen, that actually mixing the vaccines would give a much stronger immune response.
It could do, which is why we've got the mix and match clinical trials. They'll report at the end of the summer. The booster trials as well, the Cov Boost trials, will also be able to tell us which booster shot would be the most suitable. And, of course, the scientists will then have to decide whether you boost, obviously, if you recall, the most vulnerable to COVID. We began vaccinating on the 8th of December with Pfizer and then 4th of January with AstraZeneca. So I want to give the scientists as many choices of vaccines to be able to use as a booster. They will decide whether we go September or later in this year or early next year, depending on the durability of the current vaccination program. But we need to give them that ability to have as many different vaccines in their armoury to be able to continue to manage the virus. And I think we will begin by next year to hopefully move from pandemic to endemic and treat it like we would do with the flu vaccination program. And the other bit, obviously, that the NHS is planning at the moment is how do you dovetail a COVID boost campaign with the flu vaccination program in the autumn.
Look, I can appreciate you're in a very difficult position because, I mean, your priority, your focus is vaccinating the United Kingdom. But when you're looking at buying all these extra vaccines, so the 60 million doses of Pfizer, when we don't quite know if that's going to be the right approach for everybody, and you say getting lots of these different vaccines on board, when we know there is still this huge global problem, at what point do we start to look at this from Westminster as a global issue that we need to start dealing with?
Really important question. So literally from the inception of the Vaccines Task Force, when the Prime Minister set up the Vaccines Task Force, he gave us 2 priorities. One, find the vaccines that will work against this virus. So go out and look and find them. Manufacture them in the UK if you can. Contract early if they're not manufactured in the UK and get them here. But the second priority from back in March of 2020 is how do you help the rest of the world? He said, have a plan of how we help the rest. So we're the first country to put £548 billion to the COVAX, which is the infrastructure that's now delivering 40 million vaccines have landed for over 100 countries, so the Philippines and Ghana and Ivory Coast have all been receiving COVAX. The bulk of it, by the way, is the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. The Oxford team and AstraZeneca are not making any profit on that. It's being done at cost whilst we're in pandemic around the world. So we are doing a hell of a lot to make sure we help the rest of the world. India has historically been there for our NHS. Many colleagues who work in the NHS are of Indian heritage. It's really important that we're one of the first countries to help India. Hundreds of pieces of health machinery that was needed by them, including oxygen concentrators, went out to India. But we're also, through Oxford and AstraZeneca, giving the Serum Institute the ability to manufacture 70 million doses a month for India and other low-income countries.
OK, look, you mentioned the Prime Minister. Can we talk about his current predicament? Sir Keir Starmer said on television last night, with these investigations and inquiries that are underway, this could all be over in 5 minutes, he said, if the Prime Minister just tells us what went on with the refurb of his flat. Why doesn't he do that? Well,
first of all, the Prime Minister has answered umpteen questions on this, including, as your viewers would want to know, did the taxpayer pay for the refurbishment or not? He paid for the refurbishment, unlike previous Prime Ministers. Tony Blair, I think, spent something like £300,000 on refurbishing the flat in number 10 over time. But here's the problem for Keir Starmer, and I listened very carefully to him last night because he did a big sit-down interview with Robert Peston, 10 minutes of that, and P.T. Barnum would have been proud of him. He was the ultimate bandwagoner. Not a single policy idea for an election, important elections coming up in 7 days' time. All he could talk about
but come on,
was this question.
But people could say the same about you, saying, well, you're trying to dodge the issue by talking about their lack of policy suggestions.
Well, we have elections in 7 days' time, and people want to know what you're going to do. Are you going to be delivering a vaccine programme? Are you going to deliver a levelling up agenda where we're investing $640 billion in infrastructure?
But the Prime Minister has said, as you said, he said repeatedly, I paid for this refurbishment. Well, he might have done in the end. What we want to know is where was the money coming from originally? There's talk of 58,000 coming from one donor, loans from CCHQ. Did any of that actually happen?
Well, first of all, the Prime Minister has appointed Lord Geidt, who was Her Majesty the Queen's private secretary, a crossbencher in the House of Lords, really important. The reforms we've made to the way Lord Geidt can effectively do his job is to allow him to be proactive in his investigation. The Prime Minister will absolutely make sure that he delivers everything that Lord Geidt asks for to be able to conduct that investigation. The Prime Minister has been very clear that he paid for this, that he also followed all the ministerial codes, took advice, and if Lord Geidt, in his investigation, requires the Prime Minister to make any other declarations, then he will also do that.
So that's a commitment, is it? Because ultimately, as it stands, the Prime Minister is the ultimate arbiter of this own investigation. He could dismiss it. He could dismiss the recommendations. You saying that whatever Lord Geidt comes up with independently will be acted upon.
So this is a really important question. Part of our reforms now allow Lord Geidt to be able to be proactive rather than reactive. All ministers serve with the confidence of the Prime Minister. He's appointed Lord Geidt to look at ministers and ministerial conduct. It's only right. I serve because I have the confidence of the Prime Minister. If I don't have that confidence, I will clearly lose my job. So ultimately, the Prime Minister has done everything in his power to answer these questions. We've got elections in 7 days' time. Labour, at the moment, are a policy-free zone. I worry because voters will look at Keir Starmer and I think they'll probably be thinking, well, where are the ideas? What are you going to do to better my life? How are you going to give me a job at the end of this pandemic? Are you going to back this country being able to do the vaccinations that it needs, which is important to make sure we come out of this pandemic in as healthy a position as possible.
We will find out what the voters think in a week or so. Well, it's really good to see you this morning. Thank you very much indeed. Just a reminder that if you want to catch up on any of that interview or watch the programme when you're out and about this morning, then you can do so on the Sky News website or our mobile app. You can go to our live blog to watch the programme and catch up on the interviews on my Twitter, which is @SkyStephen. Let's talk to our political correspondent, Kate McCann. What do you think, Kate?
I think on the COVID stuff, there's clearly some really positive news on vaccinations, but there are some questions, given what Jonathan Van Tam said about people who are vaccinated being able to meet. Clearly, the government is sticking to its data collection and then the dates it set for itself. But of course, in the beginning, there were lots of people who wanted them to, who wanted to see, it be led by the data rather than the dates. It's slightly confusing, but when things are getting better, they're still being very cautious about it. So I think there will be some questions on that. But what Nadhim Zahawi said to you at the end there about the Prime Minister and about this investigation is really interesting, because Lord Guy at the moment doesn't have the power to trigger investigations on his own. We know that. Labour Party have asked the government to make that happen. But as things stand, he can't trigger an investigation himself. The Prime Minister is the only person who can do that. But Nadhim Zahawi just said to you he's proactive now rather than reactive. So I would love to know what that actually means, because while he can investigate things and while he's been given more power to make sure that these reports are published in a timely fashion, he still couldn't, for example, trigger his own investigation into Boris Johnson's conduct without the Prime Minister signing off on it. And as Labour have said at the moment, that is a real problem. OK. Kate, thank you.
Now, more than 18 million people in India now have coronavirus, with nearly 205,000 having lost their lives following another record rise in cases and deaths. The United States says it will give India more than $100 million in drugs and medical supplies. The crisis has crippled the country's healthcare system and created a desperate rush for oxygen supplies. Our special correspondent Alex Crawford sent this report from Delhi.
This is a queue for air. In the world's biggest democracy, the hunt for oxygen is getting more urgent. The man on the right says they're not filling up the cylinders completely. Lives are at stake, and every extra breath of oxygen counts right now. A young man is pleading. Brother, my grandmother is on her deathbed and the hospital sent me. Please fill mine. He's lucky he's pushed his way to the top of a very long queue and got away with it. All businesses with oxygen supplies have been told to give them over for medical use now.
My grandmother. How badly ill is she? If we don't give oxygen, she will die in hospital. Hospital say no oxygen. So you're taking this to the hospital? Yes.
These cylinders have become the lifeline for many Indians. But Harshit's grandmother needs them filled every 2 hours to keep her alive. And the hospital is in another state.
It is very far and no one is allowed to go inside. My grandma inside and my younger brother inside. Only he take surrender, no one else. How long will it take you to get to the hospital? 1 hour and 15 minutes. Okay.
Across the city, there's another line. But the shop hasn't yet got its oxygen delivery. And some of these people have been waiting since 3 in the morning. They're still here 8 hours later.
I think government should have some plan to do this thing, but they didn't do anything. The government of Delhi didn't do anything, and that's why people are suffering.
In every shop, there is no oxygen. There is no oxygen. Black market is on high. Black market is on high. When you go to hospital, there is no oxygen in hospital.
Delhi's under lockdown now, but part of the criticism is that they lifted it far too early, and there were crowds of people all gathering at political rallies.
Indians are now dependent on cylinders, partly because several governments have restricted oxygen manufacturing here in the capital to just small-scale industries. They've spent only around 2% of the country's GDP or income on the health industry. It's meant charities have had to step in to provide oxygen for very sick people who can't get it elsewhere. It's all on a very small scale, but for some it's vital. She's been under this tree for 2 days. cared for by her son, obviously struggling. The family wanted us to show this. They want their own government and others to see what's happening here.
And everywhere not oxygen available. In all hospitals, oxygen not available.
Others are running dangerously low. Harpreet has probably only about half an hour of oxygen left.
Yeah, it's almost exhausted. You can see over here.
Their load arrives in the nick of time. This hand-to-mouth surviving because many believe the government declared COVID victory far too early and didn't plan ahead. The lack of oxygen-generating units means hospitals and their patients are reliant on supplies coming in from far too few plants around the country. In this hospital, they have less than a handful of tanks, and their storage is being used up every few hours. So the head of the hospitals decided to buy his own oxygen manufacturing unit.
So we can order 5 plants, so that can just have a capacity of almost like 5,000 cylinders a day.
He sourced one from Turkey and is hoping it'll be here within 7 to 10 days.
Now, since we have experienced it, that in times of crisis, we can land up in such a situation where the life of the patient is put to risk. I think we need to take some steps so that we become more independent and not depend on the weak supply chain mechanism which is there existing currently.
But India is still in the grip of a coronavirus nightmare, and tens of thousands of its citizens can't think days ahead whilst they're struggling to breathe hour to hour. Alex Crawford, Sky News, Delhi.
The FBI has carried out searches at the Manhattan apartment and office of Rudy Giuliani, who was previously Donald Trump's personal lawyer. The raid is part of an investigation into the former New York City's mayor's business dealings in Ukraine. Mr. Giuliani's lawyer denies he's broken the law and has called the searches legal thuggery. A woman has been arrested after 4 people were found dead inside a hospital in Germany. A 5th person was left seriously injured inside the clinic in Potsdam. German media is reporting all of the victims were patients and the woman arrested is an employee at the clinic. The Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny is due in court this morning. It could be the first time he's been seen since starting a hunger strike in prison. He's appealing against his conviction for defaming a World War II veteran. Scientists say one of the largest ice shelves in Antarctica is at risk of collapsing because of warm mountain winds. They say the shelf is being hit by gusts warmed by increasing levels of greenhouse gases. And just to remind you, you can see the Daily Climate Show later at 6:30 and 9:30 here on Sky News. Now, the United Nations says cuts in British aid will have a devastating effect on its work to reduce maternal and child deaths around the world. Let's get more from our Foreign Affairs editor, Deborah Haynes. Just what are we paying for at the moment, Deborah?
Well, the UK back in 2019 committed to spend £425 million on a programme that's run by this UN agency, which is all about family planning, as you say. And it was at the time billed as the biggest financial partnership that the agency had ever experienced in its history. A hugely significant moment and a big pat on the back for the UK. And this year alone, the UK had committed for that programme, which, like you said, it provides life-saving family planning support to women and girls in the poorest parts of the world, including advice about, including condoms, other forms of contraceptives, and then maternal medicines, which really does help to stop unintended pregnancies, prevent dangerous abortions, and also give life-saving help to women and girls and enable them, empower them to be able to go on and go to education rather than become mothers at an early age. But the agency now says that this £150 million that the UK had committed to spend has been slashed to just over £20 million and has warned that that funding that's gone could have gone to help about 250,000 men and girls and children that might now die.
OK, Deborah, thank you. This is Sky News Breakfast. Let's get a check on the weather for you today with Isabel. Are we still going to see a bit of rain and drizzle today, Isabel?
Well, there'll be more typical sort of April showers, that type of thing, Stephen. But one thing's for sure, it's feeling cold. Really disappointing temperatures this month. I talked yesterday about it being the frostiest April, and it looks as though it'll be probably the third, maybe second sunniest on record. And obviously, that's led to clear skies overnight and frost. But let's take a look at what we've got out and about today.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
So a little bit different to yesterday. Yesterday we did have some heavy rain across the south. Some parts of South Wales and Dorset collected around an inch of rain, 25 millimetres. Today it's a different flavour to things. It starts off mostly bright with some sunshine. The clouds bubble up and then we'll see some showers developing. Probably few, if any, showers across the south. Most of them across the north where they could be heavy, potentially. Some hail mixed in, and it's cold, 8 to 12 degrees with that northerly breeze. Through this evening and tonight, the winds ease a touch, and inland we could see a little bit of frost in the countryside. And again tomorrow, the month closes on a chilly note. A little bit of frost in the countryside first thing. Showers become more widespread through the day, with a few heavy ones in the southwest. As you can see, stays chilly.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Isabel, thank you. Still to come on Sky News Breakfast, turning crisis into opportunity. President Biden talks about life after the pandemic.
Only about half a mile from the Turkish coast, and it's evident that the boat seriously overcrowded. This is one of the most severe viruses in the world.
I'm Alex Crawford and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
This is going to be the biggest party Tripoli has ever seen.
That's it got us then. There's a lot of action going on, a lot of still.
We aim to be the best and the most trusted place in news.
Clearly not had very much to eat at all, a lot of them extremely thin and very frail. Her arms, look at her arms. I can put my entire hand round.
This is the cocktail of drugs which the doctors at this hospital have been giving their coronavirus patients, made for people who want clarity in an uncertain world.
Once it takes a hold, it's very, very difficult for these firefighters to get a grip of it and get on top of it and put it out.
The world's largest falls now down to a trickle in places.
I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake.
Whoa! Getting up close and personal with a rhino.
This is what makes the job so fantastic.
Now, the government says it doesn't want people who've had 2 vaccine doses to meet up before lockdown rules are eased. It comes as the UK Deputy Chief Medical Officer Jonathan Van Tam said he believed it was incredibly safe for fully vaccinated people to meet. But the Vaccines Minister, Nadhim Zahawi, told me restrictions would not be relaxed early.
The good news is we're not seeing any evidence that would lead us to believe that we can't meet the next step in May, the really important step, 17th of May, and then ultimately, obviously, the 21st of June. But it's much better to be careful and follow the data, collect the data properly, analyse it, and then make a decision, than to... We all want to obviously get our freedoms back as quickly as possible, but let's do this properly, let's do it safely.
Now, President Biden promised a huge wave of public spending last night as he outlined plans for life after the pandemic. In a speech to Congress marking his first 100 days in office, President Biden said America was on the move again. Well, let's talk to Capri Cafaro, who's in Ohio, a Democrat who was former leader of the Ohio Senate, and the former Republican congressional candidate Joe Collins, who's in Los Angeles. Good to see you both this morning. Joe, can I get your reaction first and foremost to what President Biden said last night?
Well, I think it was probably one of his better speeches. I was really looking for some outline on how he plans to move his agenda forward. But with the amount of spending that he's been doing, and, you know, when I was younger, we used to trash politicians who increased the national debt. But at this point, it's being praised for some reason. I think the long-term effects of this much spending is something that people are not calculating. I know his plan is to tax people who make over $400,000 a year and tax the major corporations. But I don't think he takes into effect that the amount of money that you could tax these companies does not even equate to the amount of spending that he's doing. So when it comes to that type of budget, I'm really not a fan. I think that they should go back to the drawing board and create a new plan.
OK, Capri, I mean, certainly he was claiming that he's achieved an awful lot in his first 100 days. Is that a justifiable claim?
Well, it depends on the aspect of policy that you're looking at. So, for example, when it comes to the vaccine rollout, dealing with the COVID pandemic, certainly he has a lot to, be proud of. No question about that. Now, in the United States, anyone over the age of 16 has the opportunity to get a vaccine. Now, he has a lot of other challenges, for example, when it comes to things like immigration. And he also passed the American Recovery Act, which I agree with my colleague, spends a lot of money, but it also puts a lot of money back into the pockets of the American people. $1,400 for anybody that is earning less than, I believe it's $72,000 a year. So there's a lot of good that Joe Biden has achieved in the first 100 days.
Yeah, in terms of the pandemic response and the vaccination response, we know he's way ahead of target on this, Joe. Do you think he's doing better than his predecessor would have done if the election had gone the other way?
Well, I think that, judging from the situation, President Trump being in office whenever the pandemic had first started and Joe Biden right now being a person who is in office, I think that the push to get people vaccinated with this vaccine has been extraordinary. And I think both presidents did a really great job of getting the vaccination out and doing what they can to ensure the American people and even across the entire world that this vaccination was safe and it was going to help, solve the problem with the COVID-19. So I would have to agree when it comes to the vaccination process. I mean, bar none, he did a really great job. His predecessor did a really great job. But Joe Biden's the president right now, and I look forward to seeing how this whole vaccination process is going to work out here in America.
What do you think, Joe, though, about, obviously, in terms of moving forward, one of the big issues is how divided the country has been after the last administration, and particularly on the racial issue, and with the verdict on George Floyd, on that killing. There are whole issues which are being opened up here. There's an awful lot to unite, isn't there? So that is a very difficult task.
Yeah, it is a lot to unite. And I think what people have to do is stop saying that every single thing that's happened to people of color is racist, and we have to stop the white guilt as well. I think we need to move forward with a plan where our politicians are creating legislation that's going to be positive and is going to benefit all Americans, not just one group of Americans, because you think that certain things are disparities. I like the way Joe Biden signs his bills into law, his executive orders. And so I think that we need to start removing policies that has been ineffective over the years and start replacing it with new policies that could potentially increase the quality of life for the American people.
Yeah, I mean, this is the issue, though, Capri, isn't it? The fact that America has become, for whatever reason, who you want to blame for it is up to you, of course, but it's become so polarised over the last few years.
It really is incredibly tragic. And as a former lawmaker, I've seen this play out at the state level and at the federal level, and it really is unfortunate. And you're right, there are a lot of parties to blame. And as a result, Joe Biden has a very heavy lift to try to unite this nation. And I would say that the first half of the speech this evening was trying to reach out, build bridges, for example, to the people I used to represent, blue-collar Americans that were attracted to Donald Trump because of his stance on trade, for example. And so Joe Biden this evening was very focused in the first half of the speech, trying to reach out to those moderates, talking about the economy, talking about how he was going to create jobs, how he was going to organize labor, how he was going to increase wages. And then on the flip side, in the second half, he was trying to appeal to the progressive base of the Democratic Party, talking about racial justice issues, talking about gun violence, and a number of other things. I think it's very reflective of the challenges that Joe Biden has, trying to unite this nation and try to appeal to the Republicans while at the same time trying to assuage the progressive wing of the Democratic Party.
Do you think he is being successful, Joe, in that? I mean, I've been struck by the fact that you have been anything but dismissive of President Biden. I mean, you may not have voted for him, but you're not dismissing what he's doing.
No, he's the president of the United States, and I have to respect that. I am a guy who served 13 and a half years in the United States Navy under Democrats and Republicans, and I think he's doing a good job for the position that he was put in. One thing I would like to see, looking back from the Clintons to the Bushes to the Obamas to the Trumps to the Bidens, is an administration that will build off the successes of the previous administration. I think that will bring the entire country together. I mean, it's okay to criticize policy, but let's build off the success of the policies and let's remove what didn't work, replace it with something that did work. I think that's something that all of America can appreciate.
Would you agree with that, Capri?
Absolutely. And I feel as if my colleague in Los Angeles and I should work together as Democrats and Republicans and find a way to build consensus, because that is the only way forward in this nation. And it is a real tragedy for a leader in democracy to be facing what we've been facing in the last 5, 6, and even further back. So I totally agree. And I'm so glad to hear a Republican across the aisle being committed to bipartisanship.
Can I just ask about the jobs for American people? We're going to make American, we're going to buy American, we're going to keep the money sort of within America, if you like. I mean, I was a little bit surprised that he came out with that in some respects. But do you think that is going to appeal certainly to Republican voters, Joe?
I think so. One of the biggest issues that we have here in America is that, because of the huge amount of taxes that companies face, they are taking their manufacturing overseas. And so if we can incentivize companies to come back to America, we'll build America, sell America. I think a lot of people will get on board with that message, Republican, Democrat alike, especially with the younger generation, because one thing that we have to understand is that the young Republicans, the young Democrats, the young independents are going to have to bear the load of the responsibilities that the older generation have left to us. So yes, build America, sell America in America is absolutely an agenda that I can get on board with.
I mean, I guess, Capri, it's classic working towards the centre ground, isn't it?
Well, here's what I would say. Donald Trump was successful in communities like mine, traditionally Democrat, working class, because of his stance on labor unions and trade, for example. And so the fact that Joe Biden is talking about these issues is incredibly appealing, I think, to really important parts of the American electorate.
Well, look, really good to talk to you both this morning. And nice to have a bit of consensus across the aisle, as you say. Good to see you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, still to come on Sky News Breakfast, doctors tell us they think that not enough of us are going for proper laboratory COVID tests. More details in a moment.
What do you do? What do you say? It's smoke and mirrors. You never stay.
There was a sense of frustration with all the lads in the band that what we were seeing unfold and particularly across the pandemic, but prior to that as well, was people just not being able to afford the basics of life, and also that they just and it just started to increase, and we just thought, well, look, we've got to do something about this, and on the back of the fantastic work that was happening around food banks. But we were just frustrated about that in the UK in 2021, there was a necessity for them, which was shocking to us. And people use food banks for various reasons. It's not just one. It's just not just one reason. It's an accumulative effect of maybe losing a job or carers or and it was just shocking for us. So we wanted to do something to raise awareness of the issue, but also to just bring a little bit of light and air into that what is quite a heavy subject. And nobody wants to be in a position whereby they can't supply food and the absolute basic necessities for their families, and that's awful. That's an awful position to be in. And it's an awful, and it's just kind of this reaction to it's for them. The track is for them. It's just, we're waiting for the summer. We're waiting for a few better days. The pandemic's not been great. In fact, it's been a disaster for many, many people. And as always, when things like this hit societies, it's always the people that are less fortunate, the poor, the working class, that actually take it on the nose. And we just couldn't sit back and watch it, really. And all the great work that Marcus Rashford, and all of that movement towards actually, look, this is what's happening in our country, and it's not acceptable to us. So we need to make the choices and changes that we need to make to stop this. Because 25 years ago, we didn't need food banks. Why do we need them now?
For the early risers.
As we examine the story beyond the headline.
For the knowledge seekers.
Welcome to Divided States.
For the straight talkers, the curious, and the ones who want to be entertained.
Backstage, Sky News' entertainment podcast.
For wherever you are.
Welcome to Sophie Ridge on Sunday podcast.
For the ones who want to know more.
Welcome to the All Out Politics podcast.
For the listeners.
From Sky News Storycast.
Sky News Podcasts. Listen and subscribe for free.
Did you know that if we make small changes to our lives, we can reduce air pollution by loads? But how much? Exactly, loads.
Well, the weather is chilly, but quite typical for April in that the day will start off fine for many inland areas, and then the clouds will bubble up and we'll see showers developing. Showers mainly across central and northern areas, many southern parts probably escaping with largely dry weather. Quite chilly though, particularly on the North Sea coast, 8 or 9 Celsius there, and even in the south only 11 or 12, so well below average for the time of year, with the cloud breaking to give a frost tonight. And air quality, well, as you can imagine, it is good in this air mass, so low levels of air pollution for most.
The Air Quality Report, sponsored by Philips Air Purifiers.
Now, some doctors say they're worried that not enough of us are going for what would they call a proper coronavirus test, instead relying on the kits that can be used at home. They say more of us need to have the PCR test rather than the lateral flow test. They're the ones that give you a very quick result. Well, let's talk to Dr. Angela Raffel, public health consultant with experience in communicable disease control and screening programmes. Good to see you this morning. Look, why are you not happy about the number of lateral flow tests being taken?
So the British Medical Journal asked me to write an editorial this week, and it isn't as simple as lateral flow tests bad, PCR tests good. It's all about how we run our testing system. So test and trace needs to focus on those who are most at risk, people who've got symptoms, no matter how mild, and anybody and everybody they've been in contact with. And then there needs to be support to isolate. That has to be the backbone of pandemic control. And what we're saying is that needs to go on getting better. It has been getting better, but it needs to get way better still. And we're going to need that in the long term. And the new approach of home tests for everybody, what we're saying is that hasn't been evaluated. It could be a complete waste of time and effort. And we need better studies. There's really no basis for that policy.
Why a complete waste of time and effort? Because we know the tests aren't as accurate, but they've got to be picking up some positive results, haven't they?
There's not an expert body in the world that recommends focusing on people at the lowest risk. So the CDC in America, the WHO, they don't say test lots of people at home who haven't been in contact. What they say is test the people who've been in contact with cases, test when there's an outbreak, test when you've got very high risk areas. So it's more about who we're targeting the test to. And then the other aspect is the lateral flow tests potentially are really, really useful, but we have no evidence at all about how well they work when they're done by untrained people on themselves. And we need some studies on that. So we've got two important pieces of evidence. One was the really hard work they did in Liverpool, where they tested a quarter of the city. It didn't make any impact on the surge of infections over Christmas. It didn't make any impact on hospitalizations and deaths. And another is a study recently published comparing care homes that were doing lateral flow testing with care homes that weren't. Didn't make a difference to outbreaks. And the staff said it was very hard to stick to the protocol. What they really need is more staffing so that they can follow infection control procedures.
Yeah, but when you talk about, there's no point in mass testing where there's no evidence that anyone's been in contact with a positive case. I mean, isn't part of the problem here that what is it, 33% or so of all cases are asymptomatic? So how would anybody know if they've been in contact?
There's a difference between how many people who contract the virus show symptoms versus where does most of the transmission comes from. So the overwhelming evidence at the moment is that the vast majority of transmission comes from people with symptoms. That may be related to the fact that they're coughing more. It may be that they have higher viral loads. I think there is a real wish that we could catch people in that time between when they've got infected and when they start showing symptoms. But the best way to try and do that is by contact tracing. So everybody who's been in contact with someone who's got a case, either in the 2 days before they got it, are they the place they got it from, or who's been in contact with them since they've had symptoms. But testing ordinary healthy people at home who haven't had much contact is, it's very hard to see where the government got the idea for that policy. They dreamt it up last summer. I don't expect they'll change their minds. They've spent £3 billion on lateral flow tests, and now they've got to use them up.
Look, in terms then of what you would ideally like to see, would that include more PCR tests being done at the drive-in centres or whatever? Because, clearly with that, that could be a logistical nightmare, couldn't it?
We have, the government has built an amazing capacity for testing. In the UK, we do more tests per case detected than anywhere else in the world at the moment. So we're just not using those tests to best effect. We have underused capacity for doing PCR tests. There are many other promising rapid tests in the pipeline that can give a very quick turnaround. We could, for example, use these lateral flow tests at the test and trace centres to give people a very quick result and then send some of the sample for PCR. We should be able to do PCR with a 24-hour turnaround, and that is getting better and better. So what I'd like to see is more studies of whether symptomless testing of low-risk people is worthwhile, more studies of how well these tests perform when done by people who aren't trained. But primarily, test, trace, and support to isolate, getting better and better and better.
Dr. Raffel, good to talk to you. Thank you.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
It's right up there being one of the top 3 sunniest Aprils, but my word, it's a chilly one, and it ends on a chilly note as well. We've got a frost this morning, and we've got a north or northeasterly wind over us as well. Not particularly pleasant out there. Temperature struggling to about 8 to 12 degrees today. Really disappointing for the time of year. At least there is some sunshine for many this morning, but it's one of those days where the shower clouds will develop, and there will be quite a scattering of April showers through the day. Some hail across the northeast, maybe some snow for northern peaks as well. But I think southern areas probably missing the showers and staying dry for most of the time. And then as we head through the evening, the showers fade, long clear spells develop. And again, we're expecting a touch of frost tonight. Not particularly harsh frost, but there will be a little bit of frost to wake up to as we head our way into Friday morning. And then again, after that nice start, the shower clouds will develop and we end the month with some hefty showers, maybe more than today across the southwest of the country as well, with temperatures around 8 in the northeast, 11 or 12 in the south.